about women and labor, but also about participation of women in trade unions and the challenges we have and so on, which is an area which I'm quite familiar with. So I thought in both areas, I will speak from my own experience and maybe contextualize it in a larger political context. To begin with, when we speak about trade unions, before I start saying how bad the men are in the trade union movement, I always say that Sri Lanka has a very low unionization rate. In the 1980s, we all know about the general strike and how the government went about breaking trade unions. And it was not one event. The general strike in 1980s was not just one event. It was just the start of a series of anti-union policy, which was maintained by the state, of course pushed by companies and corporates and so on. So as a result of that, in around 2017, when the ILO did a research on trade unionization rates in Sri Lanka, both the public sector and the private sector together, we have less than 10% of workforce actually unionized. So it is in that context that I want to speak about women's participation in trade union and trade union leadership, because we are already looking at a very small labor force which is actually unionized. And it is within that context all this struggle between men and women are happening. And the inherent patriarchal, sexist values in our society also becomes applicable to the trade union movement. So apart from the obvious inherent structural problems, there are also other issues why, when I see now, when I'm working with trade unions, I'm working with workers. Even now it's very hard to get workers to join unions and unionize. And I have identified 3 different power structures which prevent workers from unionizing. One, of course, is the corporates, the companies, which is an area which people rarely speak about, how the corporate structure in countries like Sri Lanka find very creative ways to prevent workers from unionizing. For instance, if we, in our campaign to unionize workers, we engage with various power structures. Someone was asking about brand audits. We engage with brands. We engage with organizations like the IFC, which is giving loans to factories and so on. So when we engage with these organizations and institutions, they would ask us, so what is it that corporates are doing which workers are scared of? Because most instances, we can't point out and say, this is why workers are not joining unions. This is why they are, because most instances, the violence and the union busting is not direct. It's so indirect. It's part of, it's part of the language. When they join the workforce, they would ask, are you part of any organization? So when the company asks, are you part of any organization, workers inherently understand it as, are you part of a union? If you're part of a union, we will not hire you. So despite the fact that the Sri Lankan labor law is very clear that you cannot prevent a worker from joining a union, the companies have structured and strategized in such a way that despite the fact that the law says you can join unions and you're protected and so on, workers inherently know that if you join union, you will be dismissed and the law or the state will not stand by you. So that is on the side of the companies. Then the state, which is heavily influenced by the corporate interest and corporate lobbying and so on. So how does the state enable workers from, or enable companies to prevent workers from unionizing? So what they do is, to give an example, in 2020, my union tried to organize a group of workers in a particular factory in the free trade zone. And the moment we declared the union, the main organizers were dismissed. So then we went, lobbied with the state, we went to the National Labour Advisory Council, we went to the Labour Department, we went to the Labour Minister. So what they do is, they don't say, oh, this is great, you should not have tried to unionize. And what they do is, they stall the process. So they stall the process. Now it has been 3 years, and still the case is not over in the Labour Department. So if you're a worker who is working for, let's say, 30,000-40,000 rupees per month, you can't wait for 3 years to get back your job if you want to, just because you want to form a union. That's not possible. So what workers do is, eventually, after 2-3 months of waiting, they would settle. They would settle with the company. The company would give them 1 million compensation. It's peanuts for the company. So they would settle and the union would break there. So the state, even though despite the fact that the laws are very, colorful, you have the constitution says you have the right to form and join a trade union, then the Industrial Dispute Act says if you break a trade union, then there would be penal consequences. It's, it's very nice to, I'm also a lawyer, we also studied this in law books. It's very nice to listen to all of this in the law. But when you, when you go to the ground and when you see and when you don't see anyone unionizing, and then when you start working on these issues, then you realize how structurally, how power structures and how political structures keep workers from unionizing. And the strange thing is it's accepted in societies. Let's say we go and raise this issue of unions, immediately people would say, no, workers don't like to join unions because unions are politicized, they always go on strikes, workers don't like to go on strike, and so on. But that is not the reason why workers don't join unions. Yes, there are unions which are affiliated to political parties, and yes, there are unions which engaged in strikes which they should not engage in. But that is not the reason why workers don't join unions. Workers don't join unions because if you join a union, you will get fired. That's it. And every single worker in this country knows that. And that is why workers don't join union. And I have to say this in this forum also, because even in forums like this, I have heard of opinions where people would try to rationalize and justify as to why workers are not unionizing. So I keep repeating that. I say workers do not join unions because workers know if you join a union, you will be dismissed from work. So therefore, they don't join it. And not only the company, but the state, the Sri Lankan state, even this government, the NPP government, which has large union base and so on, even this government has not taken a different attitude towards union, where they have publicly stated anti-union sentiments and so on. So that is the second aspect. In terms of the third aspect, which I have noticed particularly in areas where there is low unionization rates, for instance, the garment sector, where you hardly have unions in the garment sector, and also because garment sectors are located in areas called the free trade zones, where unions don't have free access to speak to workers inside companies and so on. One of the things which I wanted to specifically mention is donor funding. So when I started working in the union movement, there were people who have worked in the union movement before me who have said one of the biggest challenges to unionizing workers in the garment sector is the fact that there are NGOs who are working in the garment sector. So in the early days, I took the position that no, they don't allow unions to function, so we need to have someone else at least doing something, at least someone coming and raising the problems inside inside these garment sectors and so on. But what happened was, NGOs coming and trying to organize workers doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a political context where donors fund NGOs to get workers into meeting by funding workers. To give an example, if let's say I'm running an NGO and I write a project and say, for this meeting I'm going to get 30 workers, and 30 workers don't turn up because they don't turn up for union meetings, then what do I as an NGO do? Because I need to write a donor report, I would pay workers. I would pay workers 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 rupees to turn up for the meeting. So yes, at the end of the day, my project and my report would look great. But, the NGOization of the union movement, in the end, depoliticizes workers. Depoliticizes workers from actually struggling, fighting to be part of unions and engaging in their rights and so on. So in areas where there are low unionization rates, like for instance garment sector, where we really badly need unions, these are three challenges which I see in terms of workers coming, and particularly female workers coming forward to unionize, because female workers also ultimately have to bear the responsibility of sending money back home, so they can't afford to lose a job. Getting dismissed from work is not an option for them, so they can't afford to lose a job. So because of that, workers don't want to come and join unions. So that is one thing which I want to flag. The other thing is the recent labor law, if the IMF and this so-called IMF pushing for increased women's participation in the labor force. I'm glad even before me this was spoken about. People are always saying we have very low women labor participation, 30 to 35%. Men are like 70%, women have low participation. So now let's increase the women's labor participation. So when when the IMF comes and says this, this broad statement, immediately the impression we get is it's a good thing. Yes, women should, we need to have equal rights for women. Women should have equal rights to engage in workforce and so on. So it sounds very grand and nice. But how does that actually get translated in practice? when the IMF comes and says a blank statement like we need to increase labor force participation of women, the consecutive governments, the Ranil Wickremesinghe government, now this government also continuing, what they actually hearing is, we have to somehow increase the women into, we have to herd the women into factories. We have to herd the women into, somehow this wage labor. So what are the things which are missing here? One thing is that, and these are actual examples, right? One thing is that in our law, there are barriers to women engaging in night work. So what are these barriers? Without the consent of the woman, you can't force a woman to engage in night work. So the company has to actually go and speak to a female employee and get a written consent for her to be employed in night work. So what did the government think? This is very hard. Companies can't be going and asking every woman, do you want to work in the night work or not? So let's remove this from law. No consent is needed hereafter. Any woman can be engaged in night work. So now it's equal. Men also in night work, women also in the night work. Both can be happily, equally exploited in the night when everyone wants to sleep. In 2017, when this whole night work thing came, and I should say some feminists were like, equal rights, this government is going to improve equal rights and so on. We went and spoke to workers in the free trade zone, and we asked men, what do you all think about night work? The men said, no one wants to do night work. We want to sleep in the night. We don't want night work for women. We don't want night work for men. We want to sleep in the night. And then what does the government do? Because institutions like the international institutions like the IMF comes and says, increase female labor force participation, they just come and say, let's remove the restrictions, what they call the restrictions in law, and now they're removing the protection given to women for night work, and now women are being herded into factories in the morning, in the night, and so on. The other thing they're saying is the reason why women are not joining labor force is because, if you have an 8 to 5 job, or if you have like a 8-hour work day, then not all, like for instance, if a woman becomes pregnant, then she has to look after the child, so she has to leave the workforce to look after her baby. So now let's think of a mechanism, while women are, raising a child, they can also engage in this labor force. Now let's think of a strategy for that. And the new labor law reform, which was proposed by the Ranil Wickremesinghe government, encourages informalization of labor. So what do people sitting in Colombo say? Oh, that's great. Now women can work from home, home-based work. They can do part-time. They can do 4-hour work. They can look after their child and then come running to the factory to work 4 hours. So that's great. But what is actually going to happen on the ground, and we know because it has already been happening, is that companies would start hiring women only for this part-time work. Because if they hire women for part-time work, then they don't have to pay maternity payment. And companies are already lobbying the government to say that maternity payment and the burden of maternity payment should not fall on us. It's too much of a burden on us. We should not be bearing. Government should be bearing. Government should be bearing the responsibility of looking after maternity benefits of workers, and that responsibility should not fall on us. So this is how, when you just blanketly say there is low labor women's participation and therefore you have to increase, the governments which are heavily influenced by corporate lobby basically are thinking we need to remove whatever protections which are there for women. We need to remove whatever responsibility which workers have fought and won. Maternity benefits is not something which fell from the sky. Workers fought for it. Unions fought for it. We have to remove all these protections, so automatically, women will be herded into these workforces. So despite the fact that I'm simplifying this and saying these are experiences, these are stories, these are narratives which we hear on the ground on a day-to-day basis from companies, from members of the government, and these have real consequences for women. The other the one last point which I wanted to make is this buzzword about sexual harassment. Anything else can happen to women. They can be stuck with 10 hours of work without overtime pay. Women can be made to work without giving bathroom breaks. Women can be made to work without allowing them to drink water. None of that matters. But the moment some case of sexual harassment happens, all the brands are like, sexual harassment, we want to prevent. We don't want our women to be sexually harassed and so on. But the funny thing is, when we go and tell brands, the reason why women are sexually harassed at workplace is because they are being forced to meet targets, which is humanly impossible, And the only way to reach these targets, this only way to reach these garment, targets is by sexually harassing workers. That part no one wants to listen. Companies don't want to listen, government doesn't want to listen, brands also don't want to listen. And when we go and tell them, sexual harassment is not a one-off incident. It's not like one supervisor is coming and groping one woman. It is part and parcel of the production process. In order to achieve the target, you have to sexually harass the worker. If we have a workers' meeting for 3 hours, every single union knows this. We have to give 1 hour to allow the women to come and speak about what they went through that entire week in the factory. And 90% of the story is that the supervisor is harassing them, sexually harassing them, verbally sexually harassing them. So sexual harassment is part and parcel of the production process. And the reason why women cannot counter this sexual violence at workplace is because they are not allowed to unionize at workplace. So everyone who wants to, we don't tolerate sexual violence at workplace. Corporates have all these great advertisements and all of that. And all of us are also highly taken about it, right? Like during Women's Day, we would talk about gender-based violence and all of that. But the crux of it is, why are women harassed at workplace? Because they don't have power in workplace. When you don't have power, and the only way to build power at the workplace is through allowing women to unionize. When you do not allow women to unionize, sexual harassment continues to happen. So you cannot, what I'm trying to say is, we can't take this sensationalized equality for women, women are not in the leadership position, we don't tolerate sexual violence. All of these are, these buzzwords and so on. But these does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a larger political context of how production is designed in countries, third world countries like Sri Lanka, where sexual violence, where the subordination of women, where women are not allowed inside leadership, all of that is part and parcel of the production process. So I hope all of us in the future, when we speak about these buzzwords about women, sexual violence, women in leadership positions, equal rights for women, we also speak about it in a larger social, political, and economic context of why these things continue to happen in third world countries like Sri Lanka. Thank you.